Okay, class. I've got this essay for you guys that that you can read uh, that I've got uploaded here, um, or rather, perhaps maybe me going over it will be a little bit more effective. Basically, what's going on here in this effective, I've kind of highlighted the parts that are the most important. But basically, one of the ideas in this film is the idea of the double. And I've talked about that in kind of an incoherent lecture for you a few minutes ago, the first lecture for this class. But basically, let me just sum it up for you. Uh, you have that presentation about the uncanny valley and things that make us feel uneasy when they're too close to being human and they're not human, versus things that make us feel good when they're act human but they aren't at all, like cartoons. Okay, so this essay is about how the replicants are kind of a modern sense of the doppleganger, or the fear of a double or other form of humans that have existed in literature for thousands of years, and oral tales for even longer, for tens of thousands of years. And basically, um, according to Freud, the doppelganger, the idea in literature of the double, is a manifestation of the phenomenon we know as the uncanny, or something that is, familiar, and you know we're used to it, and we know it, it's familiar, but all of a sudden, there's something off. There's something that doesn't feel right about it. It's eerily, at the same time, unfamiliar and strange. Um, okay, so the double is essentially a part of this uncanniness, this thing that should be familiar but isn't. Okay, and basically, there's been a history where there's a fear that the double, is going to replace the original. And that's what this thing is all about, with the replicants. Humans, in Blade Runner, have, specifically the Tyrell Corporation, have usurped God, essentially, and tried to play gods as creators of these organisms, the replicants, you know. And the intention is, of course, for Tyrell to leave a lasting legacy, to, in a sense, to be immortal in some way through the legacy of his creations. But then there's the fear that that which we create will get out of hand, will get out of control, and rise up and replace us. Okay? So basically, that's what these replicants all are. They're like, they're doubles. They're creatures, things are going to rise up. And essentially, because they're better than us, more human than human, as they say in the movie and in the book, they're gonna eventually kill us and replace us, which you'll see as you read the novel is a much bigger concept than in this film. Um, okay, one thing that's interesting about this film also is that the more that the replicants are like humans, the more the humans seem to be inhuman. So it's almost like humans are losing their humanity and the replicants are gaining humanity, and it's very much like that more in the book than it is in the movie, because they're vastly different. Okay, I like this section down at the bottom left hand of the book. Whereas doubles by multiplication are alike in nearly every respect, identical twins clones, doubles by division utilize two further distinguishing principles, which can also be given rhetorical labels: complementary and antithesis. Each self implies that the other lacks and is the opposite of its alter ego. Fitted together, the divided selves complete each other or produce a composite, a larger whole. You know, so in other words, all of Roy Batty's flaws and his greatnesses also can be compared to Deckard or Terrell and their flaws and greatnesses, and kind of complement each other in a way, if that makes sense, kind of like a yin and yang. One thing it points out that initially, there's competition or rivalry up at the top of page 7 there between doubles for the same space or location, the same position or rank, the same right to exist. To prevent this competition, the humans of Blade Runner have forbidden replicants under penalty of death to return to Earth. So the competition further implies the threat of displacement. The original self may lose its uniqueness and its identity to the other self, which replaces the original. All right, so basically in Blade Runner, in past literature, the double has been there, and the original has always feared that you'll be replaced by the double. The double will take you and replace you, kind of like with changeling babies or doppelgangers or whatever you want to say. But humans, in this case, what they've done is they've built in the 4-year lifespan to the replicants, and they barred them from Earth under penalty of death. So they're so kind of fearful of being replaced by them, they've just kind of sent them out into space to these colonies of slaves and to fight these wars and all this kind of stuff. All right. Okay. So again, you can see down here, it's like these doubles are the perfect creations we hope for, replicants of ourselves. They satisfy our impossible wish for immortality. Because their bodies are better, free from injury or disease, or not free from injury, but, they're stronger. It makes us feel like gods or creations, right? Although this is kind of blasphemous. Okay, we're going to keep going. All right. Okay, so this is what kind of it relates to our class, especially the top of page 8. Perhaps such life forms as robots, androids, sentient computers, clones, and mutants also reflect our current concerns and fears about technology. The advent of nuclear bombs, biochemical warfare, genetic engineering, orbiting weapon systems, industrial pollution, automation, the increased mechanization of society, and so forth. That's interesting because Philip K. Dick, the writer of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, said that if your job doesn't require you to think, you'll be replaced by a machine within 10 years, which is kind of interesting. So one thing this article points out about Blade Runner in the book also is the double becomes a symbol of our guilt and fear concerning technology being misused, becoming uncontrolled, going awry. It is no wonder, then that we are afraid of these shadow figures in technological disguise. We are guilty about forcing them into slavery and colonization and technological subservience. We fear these perfect artificial life forms will replace us perfectly, reverse our roles as master and slave, take us over en masse, destroy us all. Which is interesting because it kind of alludes to that, to the sequel of Blade Runner. Anyways, Blade Runner, they are or soon could be virtually indistinguishable from humans. Now, I want to stop on that point. That is one of the things. In Blade Runner, the Nexus 6 models that Harrison Ford is looking at, like himself and Rachel, are so advanced that they're almost past the Voight-Kampff eye test, which judges the blushing or pupillary response. Now, what's interesting is the book talks about this, the film doesn't. There's a percentage of humans that can't pass that test. And so one thing that it points out is, the police now, the government, has the ability, using technology, to decide what is human and what is not human, who is human and who is not. Because replicants have become so similar to humans, they can literally be killed on the spot. And because the police come out to the beck of these corporations and are administering essentially product control for this corporation's creations, the replicants, essentially government and corporations here have united. They've become one. The police are just kind of administrating corporate policy for Tyrell, and they're essentially deciding who is human and who is not. I mean, like they said in the show, in the movie and in the book, Rachel's able to go like 60 something questions into this test before they figure out she's a replicant. And our main character doesn't even know he's a replicant, although there are a few, giveaways in the movie. For instance, the replicants are the only ones whose eyes shine like a deer or a dog's, like red in the light. And when Gaff leaves the unicorn at the end of the movie, that's proof that he knows, Deckard is, got his memories, and he's telling Deckard, I know you dream of unicorns because they're my memories, my dreams. But anyways, Philip K. Dick was schizophrenic, and he worried a lot about reality. So a lot of his films have this theme where it blurs the line between what is real and what's not, what's human and what's not. The lines are blurred between master and slave, hunter and hunted, hero and villain, the animate and the inanimate and the animate, the human and the non-human. This article also compares Blade Runner to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, because Blade Runner suggests that when God's power of creation of life is usurped by the hubris of scientific man, the result is perceived as evil and produces fear and guilt in the man, the imperfect creator, about his creation. Anyways, okay. So, going on to this next section, over here on the right-hand side. One thing that's interesting about the replicants is that they're made imperfectly. They can't replicate, they can't produce. They can't replicate themselves the way that humans do. And so they're essentially, barred immortality or barred life in a way, and some of the basic rights that a human or a creature should possess. Excuse me. I'm talking a lot. All right. One thing you might recognize if you're a Rob Zombie or White Zombie music fan is this phrase, more human than human, which shows up in one of their albums. And essentially they're making something that's more human than human. And if you think about that phrase, it means essentially like a superhuman, even more human than human, but not only super in the sense of, stronger, faster, smarter, but also more deeply flawed. Super emotions, super actions, more than a human would do. I think that's kind of worth looking at. Also, if you notice in this film, you don't get the background in the film about the nuclear war having that biological agent that makes everything go sterile. So there's absolutely hardly any life on Earth, except for like a few rats and some cats and stuff like that. And those are prized possessions. So, in this movie and in the book, there are artificial animals that are also prized possessions for their ability to look like real animals, which are even more prized than are their status symbols of wealth. So, this book takes the idea of life and commodifies it, makes it something that can be produced and sold in many ways, and which kind of reflects our own. Roy Batty here in this thing, they refer to him as an Ubermensch, which means overman, which is a whole nother essay. But it's interesting that if you look at the relationship between Deckard and Batty and between Tyrell and Batty, and that's Roy Batty, by the way, the main quote unquote bad guy, it's very, very, very revealing, which is interesting, that Batty, I think, sensed that Deckard was a replicant, and shows him mercy in the end, when Deckard is hunting down and killing his own kind, shooting women in the back and stuff like that, even though they're replicants. And baddies, of course, going around killing humans. But they're kind of opposite of each other, like even Terrell is, dark hair, and he wears like a white robe, and Roy Batty's like white hair and a black, overcoat. And so there's just all these kind of comparisons that can be made between the two. Um, Batty, for example, has a lot of Tyrell's mind, and he's able to, deduce, for instance, that he can get to him by winning a chess match. Um, you can see in their conversation between Roy Batty and Tyrell when they finally meet that they have almost a similar understanding of science and genetics. Um, I just wanted to point that out. All right. This is an interesting phrase or paragraph at the top 11. Among other things, Batty represents the return of the repressed insofar as he symbolizes the collective fear of technology used for evil and destructive purposes, in particular, the specter of biogenetics and gene manipulation used to produce slaves for profit. He also evokes the repressed guilt collectively felt by humans about their exploitation and annihilation of both animals and races or nationalities of people. I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. Um, okay. Batty functions also as a mirror for Deckard's self-examination and self-questioning. It is Batty who becomes, instead of Deckard, the killer and hunter of some 24 humans, and so he mirrors what Deckard has been doing blindly and blithely all along. So it's interesting. You can see how the roles reverse from the beginning of the job to the end of the job for Deckard. And he's used and pushed into this too by Bryant. And if you watch that scene real close between Harrison Ford and the cop Bryant, who pushes him into doing this, Bryant is looking at Deckard because he's trying to determine whether or not Deckard realizes that that Deckard is a replicant, that he himself is a replicant. So, he's got Gaff, in the room, who has transplanted his memories into Deckard or copied them over, and they're sitting here talking about these replicants who have gotten killed. And if you follow the math very closely, Deckard is that other replicant that supposedly escaped on Earth. Got back to Earth mathematically. They've put memories on them, which is interesting. One of the things that this thing mentions is that there are two aspects of the double. He or she can be the harbinger of death or the guardian savior, which, Roy Batty ends up being both. Um, Batty ends up sparing Deckard, which is kind of cool, I thought, at the end. All right, sorry. I'm just looking at this paragraph about right here. There's not only a confusion of identities and roles, but also a reversal of identities and roles. The characteristics of human life become attributed more and more to artificial life, and the replicants become, as the Tyrell slogan boasts, more human than human. The polarities of hunter, pursuer, pursued, hero, villain, master, slave, and human life, artificial life already are quite blurred, now change places. Just thought that point that out. It's a good quote there. Um, One thing that's kind of interesting is it's almost like the idea of humanity goes into Deckard and Roy Batty at the end of this movie. As Roy Batty moves along and kills more and more and more, at the end he spares Deckard, and has a very human moment as he quotes poetry, these memories that are going to be lost on top of that building. And, he's even got like the nails in his hands, almost like a cry symbol. And, Deckard, kind of loses his taste for killing, as well at the end through that moment. I just thought it was kind of neat. He points out the book. I mean, this article points out down at the bottom that it is Roy Batty and not Deckard who displays those human emotions, rage, love, sorrow, revenge, suffering, empathy, humor, irony, intelligence, and awareness of mortality, more so than Deckard does. I thought that was kind of interesting. Um, One thing that's kind of interesting is you can also compare J.F. Sebastian in many ways to these people because he has a genetic disorder that's making him die more quickly. Now, unfortunately, that's not something that we have with his character, his other character. J.F. Sebastian is Eastor in the book, and he's an outcast because he's been radiated for so long. He's lost a lot of intelligence and IQ, and he's what they call a chickenhead. Um, so, anyways, just thought I'd point that out. Anyways, I just thought this article, may be useful to you. I think you can probably read it, while I'm talking on this video. I think it's enough here. But I just wanted you to be aware of some of these ideas as you read the book and the movie. There are people that should be compared to each other, and the lines of what's human and human kind of get blurred. That's what I'm mainly getting at through this. I really hope you enjoy the movie. I know it's a very intelligent film. It's a little difficult, but I hope you enjoy it.